Hi, Shedosaurus here. Welcome to my channel again. Today I'm going to show you how I tear down a piston pump. This one has got a little bit of wear that we're going to have to address. If you have a look, you can see by the shaft, Joe, if I hold that tight, fair bit of wear in that. So I'm going to put a new eccentric and eccentric strap in it today, and then also do up the wet end. Going to overhaul that side, just look at everything, clean it all out, and let's get started. So I'm gonna, easiest way is to start getting all these nuts and bolts off the head here. So I'll start on taking the cylinder end cap off. Then the head bolt, and the valve is called the strap on the other side, or valve bridge. Next, probably going to want to loosen some of this shaft here before we go taking these guys off. So the way I do it is move everything far forward, and you can see by how much, you can't really tell the slack at the ends here, other than that's when it makes a knock. But if you go to the middle of the run, you'll see. So this one, you can also hear it's clunk, clunk, clunk. So if you're going to reuse the shaft, take it far forward as you can. Get started to loosen off. Once it starts going easier, we're going to take it out from this end over here. I'll just get the bolt ready. Okay, the reason there was so much rust in there is this pump sat for quite some time without use. So if the screws up the top are a little bit hairy, I'd say just clean them out. A little bit of tapping doesn't hurt because it helps loosen them from the valve seats themselves. Also helps to stop them snap off, but you hit it too hard and it bends, then it's going to snap off. This one still needs a bit more love and attention. Going to be replacing, probably replacing these, although once I clean those up they won't look too good, but I can see there's thread damage to this one, so probably going to run a tap down that one and make sure the thread's good in there, and then we'll replace it with a new one. So take the valves out. That's the way it goes in there. Screw, spring, valve washer, valve rubber. So see somebody that they haven't put the slots in these rubbers. I'll talk about that later on, but I've seen other people put that at the bottom. That's not the way it goes. It'll still work, it's not going to work very well. Next, going to take the ones off on the other side. I'll turn the pump around. Next, going to take the valves cover off. Once again, look at how much rust and rubbish is in these. I'm going to vacuum that out as well before I go much further. It's not a bad thing. Right, you can see this one, yeah. Could be the reason why they stopped using it. Its spring was broken. Let's vacuum that out. If the pump hasn't been used for some time, you're going to find that these are the valves that are more likely going to stick and cause it not to work when you first turn it on. So it's probably a good thing that you take these guys off straight away. Also, if the pump is working and then all of a sudden just stops pumping, one of the first things, especially if you've got dirt coming in the inlet or there's rust pulling in from the other side, from intake, there's like a bowl on the other side there. Sometimes a bit of rust will shear off from the side walls and come through, and it'll sit underneath the valves. You see, these are also stuck. That one came out all right. And that'll cause the pump just to stop pumping. I'm going to vacuum that out again. I can see there's more rubbish in there. Next, take that head off. Gotta love the universal joints. Okay, there you go, heads off. Put that to the side. Next, you're going to take the flywheel off. First, undo the bolt. I'm going to use a gear puller, bearing puller, as if you don't, you go hitting with a hammer, you can damage it. If you see somebody's hit the end of the shaft and damage that, you need to file that smooth to match the rest of the shaft, otherwise you can damage this taking it off. So, and you don't want to go doing that there. Always ruins the day. Next thing we're going to do is going to take off these screws around here. This can be a very messy job. Old oil and bits of rubbish on it. So old congealed grease there, or not congealed grease, congealed oil. Other side. Try not to get in the way of the camera, eh? Right, once you've done that, I'm going to take the bearing cups off and open up the oil end. This is a really old Ajax, you can tell because it's got the brass identification plate. They look nice if you shine them up. You can see by the milkiness of the oil, there was some water in this pump at some stage. So I'm just now going to flip it up on its end and drain any oil out that's in there. You probably want to do that earlier if you haven't already taken some of the oil out. I tipped some of it out earlier. Bit of water coming out there too. Not much in the way of oil. And that's probably one of the things that could have killed the pump, but it's also been sitting for that long, being out in the weather and everything like that. Probably just rain. So next thing is, this is the eccentric strap, and you've got your piston that goes in here. There's a plug over here, a bit like a Welsh plug, and everything needs to be pushed out that front. So the way I do it is I tend to, there you go, pushed it out. Once you're up to that, let's take out the gudgeon pin. There's your piston. Definitely water was in there. And you take the eccentric strap out. There. So this one will probably be worn on the two main spots, which is on the actual eccentric there, and where the gudgeon pin goes through. I'll just give it a wipe down, put it back together, and then I'll show you. The other thing I didn't talk about here too was the wear that you get in the actual bearing cups, or it's more likely on the shaft. For some reason it tends to wear those out first, so don't know if you can see, but there is, it's hard to see, there's play in that one, and I can tell there's play in this one too, because it's actually worn the shaft and left the section where it catches the oil to send the oil back. It's left that unworn, so that's quite a bit larger than the rest of the shaft. So even though it may look good, it's actually fairly worn, and that's another thing that contributes to all the play. And as one thing wears out, if you replace the other bits and not that section, it's just going to cause the wear to come back again very quickly and bugger up your new parts. Going to just give this a blow down with some compressed air, get all the water out of it, and give it a bit of a clean up. Next we're going to take the remnants of the paper gaskets off. This one looks like it's been stuck on with something, which isn't a bad thing, but most of the oil had been leaking out of the shaft in anyway because of it being so loose. There is no seals as such on the end of the shaft. There's just the thing to catch the oil and send it back. So I'm going to give these a bit more of a clean here. Looks like I need a sharper blade. One of the methods I use to clean these up if a blade's not doing very good is a worn out flapper disc. They seem to work the best, but you just want to take it back. You're not pushing hard, you're just skimming it over the surface enough just to get the rubbish off, and expose it. Once you see any machining marks of the original machining, well, then you know that you've got the depth right. Now say you're doing a full overhaul on this and you're going to want to sandblast it, you're actually best off leaving the bearing cups on, and you've got to put a little bit of, so I use no more gaps around every point where the tiniest little bit of grit can get in. So you're talking the drain plug here, the filler plug there. To take these off, I just use a little pointed tool and I knock the 2 pins out from the inside, because they're not screw pins, they just hammer in, and take that off, and then I'll close those 2 holes back up, either with the pins and a little bit of no more gaps, or just with no more gaps. And then of course in the front here, that needs to be completely, you put the Welsh plug back in and completely silicone. There's 2 holes on it, and then around there as well. Any grit that's going to get into there, you're never going to get it all out. There's always going to be some remnant oil or grease or something sticky that it's just going to migrate to. And then as soon as you're starting to run the pump and use it, that just turns into an abrasive, and it's just going to ruin everything inside. So you have to be super careful on that. You might even be best off just keeping that closed, and then using a very strong wire brush on an angle grinder or something like that, get rid of all those bits and bobs. So I'm going to go through the pile and get a replacement internals for the oil end on this one. The measurement you have to do is this measurement here, from there to there. That because some of them will differ over the years. This one in particular is 51.1 mil. Works on an imperial pump and quotes measurements in metric, go figure. Okay, so went through the pile and I found something that matched the measurements that I'm after. So if you compare this one to the previous one, I'll give you a quick look. Absolutely no slack at all. This one being the shorter one is easier. I mean, that's just from machining. That just rocks beautifully. So with the Eccentric, absolutely no play at all. That's just beautiful, 100%. And then with the gudgeon pin, this one had a tiny little bit of play in the gudgeon pin, so I'll put an oversized gudgeon pin in. That gudgeon pin size is approximately 0.3 of a mil larger than the previous one. We'll make the hole in here slightly larger than the hole on these, because when the oil feeds to that the it's meant to move on there, whereas the pin's supposed to stay stationary. So that's what that reason is there for. So what I'm going to do first is just going to grab the gaskets, and I'm using a paper gasket sealant here. I'm just going to go grab another gasket. Oh no, it's not too bad. Yep. So I just put the tiniest little amount on each surface. Just enough to wet it off. Line the holes up. Now one thing you got to make sure with these is that when you put them back into place, that the holes go to the right place. So if you have a look over here, holes are up the top. So if you're looking at it that way, there you go, so it would go that way. And that's correct, because if you have a look here, this is the oil feeder to the shaft, and just inside there, hope you can see it, is where it feeds the oil to the center of the shaft, and there's a scrape that feeds it all along the shaft, and then if it goes right to the end, it comes back on the return from this side. Same as on the other side on this guy, that when the so 2 up the top, and I can see the hole is just up there, and you can see the scratch for the oil to feed along. So it feeds in through the top and then comes back through the bottom, gets caught by these rings over here, or that last big ring, and gets taken back to the sump again. If you put it the wrong way, like that way, it'll feed into the outlet, and instead of then the oil coming back along the shaft, some of it will, but a lot of it's just going to feed itself out of the wheel, and you're going to lose your oil, and then your pump's going to wear very fast after that. So so what I'm doing now, this is the super kit that I'm pretty much putting through this pump, and you get that available from me off eBay. And I'm just going to give this a light smear. And same on the other side. Get this back together then. So put plenty of oil on these surfaces. That hole faces up. Comes in from the back. Push it through. Now I've used the same piston, but a new gudgeon pin has been machined up for it, and the gudgeon pin is 0.4 of a mil larger on this one, and now the pin fits very snugly in the piston itself, but it's got easy movement within the hole of the eccentric strap, and that is because it's not supposed to be turning in the piston itself, it's turning in the strap as the oil's feeding up to it. So I'm going to get that started in there, and then tappity tap. Finish it off with a bit of brass. Nice and firm in the piston, that's how it should be. So that can get pushed back there now. Throw a bit of oil in the cylinder. Wunderbar. And now we're going to put the eccentric back on. So you start off by putting the eccentric back in on the strap. Once again, lots of oil on those surfaces prior to. Oil's cheaper than parts. Okay, and then now it seats on that surface as well as in those, so you oil both of those surfaces. Holes facing up. Put a screw in on that just to hold that in place. Make sure there's no muck on your screws. There you go. Now before I go put the rest in, put this one. Now it's good practice at this stage just to give this all a bit of a shake, make sure it's sitting right, because what can often happen, you go and you put it all back together only to find that it's jammed. It's because the eccentric has gone slightly side, or the eccentric strap has moved across, and so it's sitting slightly sideways So but that's moving beautiful there. Some motion lotion. Holes facing up again. It's going to drain to the right point. More screws. So tighten them all off, just give them a bit, and then work your way around and make sure that they're all nicely seated. Now on the odd occasion you'll find there's only a tiny bit of difference between the old and the new one that I've just put in, and that the space that I measured over there would be maybe a little bit different on the new one that I've put in, and that would cause this tightening procedure to actually clamp, because it pushes on either side of the eccentric, to clamp the eccentric that it won't spin, and that's not the case in this. If it is, you add another gasket and keep adding gaskets on one on each side until everything is going smoothly. 100% after that. Get to tighten this side up properly too, so that might make a difference. If it does, I'm just going to throw another gasket in. Okay, screws tightened up and looking pretty good. Nice and loose on there. Don't over tighten these ones. I've seen quite a few wheels where that part snapped out. So the original Welsh plug, even though it fitted nicely, it didn't have a breather hole, so I've drilled a breather hole in that faces up. Get that into place. All good. Happy days. Okay, we'll get started on the head now. First thing first, I'm just going to take off the old gaskets. Now if you have a look at this gasket, I mean it's stretched out a bit, but they usually made them a little bit too short. So the ones I get made these days, they actually cover the full length edge to edge. Less chance of a little blowout up the top or minor discretion on the hose. Right. Take off your gaskets. And we're going to knock the gland out. Try this first. Don't try and put stuff in between here and knock it out. It's going to cause problems. I like to, so I'm just actually hitting on the old cartridge unit that holds the buckets. There you go. Some of them have like an extension section that goes right into the inside there. and that can be really hard to get out, especially if the if that has corroded and then so it like bites onto it. But you can see this is a cartridge unit. I'm going to replace it. I'm not a fan of them at all. I prefer just the standard unit, and that way it's easier to get parts from and everything. Always remember these separator washers are important, so don't lose them. You're probably going to put a second one on just to be sure. I have to get something to loosen that a bit better. But now I'm going to take off the gaskets. That's why we wear gloves, otherwise you get cut up. Okay, next things I want to just use a nice old bristle here and try and remove any of the gunk and rubbish that's in there. Same on the top. Doesn't hurt to any bits of gunk that you can get out of that section are good. And then makes the gland fit back better. Gets a lot of rubbish out. I'm just going to vacuum that now and always clean the threads out. The more rubbish that drops down inside here, it then, when you screw the bolt in, it'll then cause the center section that holds the bolt, or that houses the thread, it can crack, and if that cracks, then water from the pressurized area here is going to go into that crack, work its way around the threads, and then come out the bottom of the head. I'm sorry, the top of the head where the bolt is, and you'll never fix that leak. It's impossible. So usually if I see anything like that that's happened, I'll replace the entire head, getting any of the thicker scale bits out. Okay, so next we're going to clean up the valve seats. They got a bit of gunk and old rubber and stuff stuck to them. For that I use this fitting that I've made. It's just glued on a bit of sandpaper, put on low speed, and fits beautifully in there. bottom ones as well. Leaves them nice. Next, I'm gonna run a cylinder hone through there and see if we got any issues with that cylinder lining. Now to hone the cylinder, what I've got is a bit of flannelette kind of bedding, and just on a drill bit, just wind it round and round and round and round. Don't get any folds, or don't put any bits where the material's folded in on itself on. Cut all those sections out, and then I'll unwind it a little bit. And I can probably take a little bit extra out of that. And that locks it in place. That'll hone the cylinder pretty much perfectly. Come from the other direction as well. Beautiful job. Let's start getting this back together now. Firstly, clean up the surfaces again. Be careful, don't go too vicious on it. As you can see there, you can still see the original machining marks of when it was leveled off, so don't dig into it too much. Rubber, washer, spring then screw. These are old Australian pennies. Being copper, they work quite well because they don't end up damaging the shaft of the screws. Second one. Snug those up nice and tight, or not that tight, but you don't want them coming undone while the pump's running. Next, top two. Now on the top two, the thing here happens with these pumps called vacuum lock, and to stop that vacuum lock happening, you'll find, especially if you're sucking from a large height, the pump finds it hard to cope, and so we'll end up, sucking a little bit of air in, maybe through the gland, or it's just tiny little bit of air in there, and the seat locks down. Then your pump is only pumping out of one side, and you get a very irregular water flow. Instead of continual flow, it's more spurt, spurt, spurt kind of thing. So to avoid that, we put scores in those top two valves. Like I said in my previous video, the later pumps actually came out with the scores already in the brass seat, which was meant you didn't have to muck around with the but you'll find that those are only the metric ones that were made from the 70s to the 80s kind of thing. So if you put a slightly larger score in one of them, always put that one to the gland side, because that's more than likely where any issues are going to occur with this vacuum lock. So for some reason it's always the gland side that'll lock up on you. Same again. Snug those up. Okay, and for the bottom two, I'm just going to go clean these valves up on a wire brush and get any old bits of rubber that's left on them, get any bits of that off, and just clean up the surfaces a little bit. Right, I finished cleaning those up. So next, don't go putting any silicone or anything on these guys. Just, you see there's often a flat part. That's to make a space for the bolt there. Now I suggest putting a little bit of oil or Never Seas. I often use Never Seas, I just don't have it on me at the moment. These parts go down. I'll tighten that off camera. Top. Now when you want to prime the pump, you're always priming from this section here. Don't go trying opening this. You're going to come into grief when you're doing that. Just clean up there. Rough enough. Once again, that's the last part you want to be rusting out in there, so a little bit of grease or Never Seas oil. Oh, always look after it. Okay, next we're going to do the buckets. There's the new shaft, new buckets, new everything. This does away with the just Just give your buckets a little bit of a massage to soften them up a little bit. This does away with that cartridge that was there before. And so you often find if you make sure it's even in all areas. If it's not, tap it down to be even. That's on nice and tight there. Squeeze the bucket into place. Next one, give it a little bit of a... Don't get too carried away. If you make it too soft, you're going to have problems getting it in. Center washer. If you don't have this center washer, the middle washers will act like a scissors, and it'll actually just shear. It always just shears the leather off at that point there. So that center one, it's got to be the right size too. It's imperative that you have that one. So I'm going to tighten this off camera, but what I do is I've got some very thick bits of paper that I fold up and put that on there, clamp that in the vise, and then screw this up nice and tight. I'll see if I can get a photo of that, but yeah, so it's just so you don't damage the shaft. That's pretty much it, and the vise holds it nice and tight that you can get this nice and tight. You want to give the buckets a really good squeeze. If you don't have strong hands, get a pipe clamp and just get them so that they're not flared out, and as the flare here, it should just help it feed in. I find it helps if you just give it a bit of a wobble like that, and there you go, she's in. Next we're going to do the gland. I'm going to go and clean this gland up, take the old shaft out. I'm running a 9.5mm. This is actually a 3/8 bit. That's just to make sure the old shaft was fairly worn, and the first time I tried to push it on, it wouldn't go on at first, and so just by running that through, it's taken out any of the dags or just the gunk that accumulates when the pump is running. So once you got that, then we're going to throw some of the gland packing in. Now a lot of people say, oh, you've got to cut it into little rounds and stick pieces in, and yeah, if you're running a centrifugal pump, maybe. But if you speak to the old guys who build the old steam locomotives and so forth, the little scale stuff, they're putting stuff in that goes backwards and forwards all day. Well, they do it this way too, and they say this is the way they prefer. So it's the way I've always been doing it. Now I've made this special tool here which just helps me knock that down. It's, you can use a bit of pipe, a bit of tube. Just don't scratch the shaft while you're doing it, and you'll find it tends to just cut the gland off. You don't have to sit there trying to cut it. So see, nicely all around the shaft, you can see it's actually shaped up to the shaft there. That's beautiful. So next I'm going to clean this guy up, and because I've already cleaned the other edges and stuff like that up, it pays to scrape, especially for this area here. There's often a bit of like grease or whatever people have been using on their gland. Now I've made a special tool to do the job for me, and I find it gives quite a nice finish, and that's this one just here that screws into the gland. It's a national pipe thread, so it's a fairly common size. Put that on there, bit of emery paper. Especially if you're painting it up, you want to make it look pretty, I'd say do this. This one for some reason has been fairly heavily scored. I don't know why. I've seen worse though, a lot worse. That'll do, rough enough for the bush. Nice and hot. And screw that on. If you've got a cast iron gland, I would recommend putting grease inside. Just wipe some grease around before you put the packing in, and then grease on this thread, or never seize on this thread. It's very important to do that. Pump will be happy forever. And then of course I use this as the new water separator. I'm going to put this part back on the oil end now. Put some never seize on the threads. Be gentle on this part, no need to muck it up at this stage. Try get it as even as possible when you tightening back up. I often nip it up the last part by hand just to you can get a good feel. Putting the shaft back in. Always do this part by hand, as you want to feel for when it bottoms out at the end of the thread. You don't want to be winding in past that. Starting to get tight now. And that'll do. A little bit more to go. There you go. Now just before the cylinder end cap goes on, just be aware that the stroke of the piston inside there should come to within about 10 mil of where the flare starts. So not at the end of the flare, but where the flare starts. So let's just have a look how close this guy is going. There, pretty much perfect. If it's too far back or too far forward, the bucket actually leaves the cylinder, and you're going to get a pump that's shaking a lot. So just try and keep that in mind, is to have that done correctly. And finally the cylinder end cap. With these, I really say it's worth tightening them by hand again, because if you tighten it up with a tool that is not feeling how far this thing should go, you end up tightening too much on one side, and it'll snap one of these lugs off, and that's the last thing you want. But if it does happen, just hit me up on eBay and I'll sell you another one. How's that? Whether it be a head or the actual end cap. That's it. Other than that, don't forget, prime from here, not from here. I was talking about wear before and spotting it. So if you have a look now, mid-stroke, any movement, the wheel moves, the mill, that shaft moves. That's what you want. This pump will run very quiet now. It's actually as quiet as the motor you put on. That's the noise that you're going to hear. Now also remember, when you're setting your separator, this one might not be set right yet. See, it's too close to there. Should touch neither surface once you finish. So that could even go back a little bit more. Because if it hits up against here, there's water dripping out of here, the regular thing. That's what you want. It's got to be sort of drip, drip, drip. That's what that drain hole's at the bottom for. But if that hits there, it splashes the water splashes up and around, then comes back down and goes into the oil end there and causes all sorts of grief.